Yeah, we'll probably start right at 4:15 because that's when we advertise. So we have a little bit.
Yeah, I was just gonna note that live stream. And we're like a couple minutes ahead of time. I just don't want anyone to miss the beginning.
So we're ahead of schedule. Round two, it's like clockwork. We had our first one a couple of weeks ago, and you know, like with anything, it's like working out the kinks. And now it's like, yeah, it's like clockwork. We got time to go right.
Sorry, you guys, we're just waiting until 4:15 and we'll start.
There might be a sign-up sheet that we passed around, so if this is your first time, please make sure you sign in. You get a sense of who's in the room, and if it's not, that's fine too. We just want to get a sense. Like if it's your first time and you want to be on the mail list, there's a check. And if this isn't your first time, you don't want to be on the mail list, you can put an X. So I think that was going around the sign-up. Does anybody have the red clipboard? So we have like a few minutes? Okay. Maybe not. We continue.
We're good.
Okay, everybody. Welcome to the second public seminar from the Partners in Education Research Program. If we were honest about how little we knew about the effectiveness of different educational interventions, we would be testing things much more regularly. That we would be trying things out on a small scale first with a comparison group and then see whether we see differences in achievement and use that as just a regular part of the way school districts and state agencies make decisions. I think that if we rely on the Institute of Education Sciences, the federal program, to provide RCTs of everything school districts are thinking about trying to implement, we're never going to get there. We're just never going to make sufficient progress. And so if we are going to start to test our ideas, it won't just be academics working with school agencies doing it. Hopefully, we'd have many more examples of school agencies testing the efficacy of things that they're trying, and starting on a small scale first and scaling things up only when they have evidence of efficacy. So we have two people here today from Wake County Public Schools in North Carolina. I'm particularly proud of these two guys for a couple of reasons. One, I'm from North Carolina, but second, because they were part of the Strategic Data Project, Data Fellows, when they first started in Wake County. So Darryl Hill is Director of Performance Strategy and Analytics in Wake County. Soon to be moving to Fulton County in Georgia, but still, he assures me, still living in Raleigh for the time being. Darryl finished his EDD here at the Ed School a few years ago. Matt Lenard is the Director of Data Strategy and Analytics for the Wake County Public Schools. And he too was part of the Strategic Data Project program. And before that was a teacher with Teach for America, and also was in graduate school in political science at Georgia State. So they're going to be talking to us about the studies that they've done of educational interventions using randomized controlled trials in Wake County.
All right, thank you so much, Tom, for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It's an honor to come back to Hugsy. I haven't been back in a while, but it's always great to see some familiar faces and some new faces carrying on the legacy of excellence that we have. So as Tom noted, we're going to talk to you today about conducting randomized trials in education agencies. And so we have three objectives today. First, we want to articulate the motivations for conducting randomized trials and the potential benefits for education agencies. Second, we want to talk about some select findings from three randomized trials that we've started in Wake. And then third, we want to help you guys to think about strategies for developing and identifying opportunities for randomized trials. I recognize that a lot of you are students, but some of you may be working in school districts, so we can work with each other to think through some of those ideas in the brief time that we have here. So I'm going to turn it over to Matthew first, and he will lead us through some about the motivation for randomized trials.
All right. Again, thank you all for being here. It's a great honor to come over and talk to you about this initiative or these initiatives that we have going on. I think before we get into the Wake County context as well as the findings, it helps to sort of shed some light on why we might want to do this kind of work. When Darryl and I arrived at Wake County in 2012, one of the first strategic data project related events that we had, we brainstormed a so-called problem of practice. And that problem that we had was, how are we using rigorous evidence to make decisions as school district employees? Concurrently, we found out that other folks were writing about this as well, right around the same time. And so we entered Wake County at a time when there was this movement toward generating new evidence in education agencies. Elizabeth Farley Ripple wrote in a 2012 paper that school districts weren't really defining how well they were using evidence, what it was for, and what decisions would follow from rigorous evidence. And an excellent memo from the OMB basically instructed agency heads to make sure that for the purposes of programming, grant making, all kinds of things, you're collecting solid, preferably empirical, experimental and quasi-experimental evidence as you pursue public policy as an agency head. Excellent memo to read. I highly recommend it. It's 5 pages and incredibly insightful. And so we take some inspiration from sports, right? A lot of folks do, especially with the advent of websites like 538, which are using really interesting predictive analytics to predict how sports teams will do. Theo Epstein reversing the curse for the Red Sox and hopefully for the Cubs as well. There's a New York Times article called Guesses and Hype in which they outline this program called Investigations, which at the time in 2005 had no evidence of effect. Since then, thanks to the efforts in sports and in public policy to use predictive analytics to arrive at causal conclusions, or at least rigorous conclusions, we've learned that from efforts like Theo's, other agencies in social sciences and natural sciences specifically can use these predictive models and these causal techniques in order to arrive at solid findings. And so Guesses and Hype is something that we talk about a lot in Wake County. When we approach school district staff about an idea, one of the first things we ask them is, well, how do you know it works? Or if they come to us and say they want to do something, we ask, how do you know it works? And this New York Times article captured really brilliantly what Guesses and Hype are. It's basically shooting from the hip, using your gut to try to make a case for a particular project or a policy. And this New York Times article talks about that in depth, and we think it's a good move to challenge the guesses and hype that you will see in your partner agencies when you make it that far. And then I think this was part of your readings. It was a lengthy article by Cook. Thomas Cook basically, I think, laid the groundwork for trying to unpack why school districts don't do more experiments. He's written a similar article in 3 or 4 journals around the early 2000s, basically unpacking this. And the essential arguments that district stakeholders make are, well, the world isn't that simple. We can't figure out an outcome from one intervention. It's impossible. Or it's politically unfeasible, or it's unethical. And as Darryl and I are going to show you, it's not unfeasible. It's not unethical. There are ways to do it in order to launch these RCTs. Another argument that Cook fights is this idea that we can use just case studies or quasi-experiments to arrive at causal conclusions, and he makes a very lengthy case for why that's probably not true. And so the Cook article lays an excellent foundation for when you get into your school districts and start talking to folks about this, and you hear these rebuttals and these comments. You can lean on Cook in order to make a good argument for why experimentation is not only necessary, but not only helpful but necessary. So Darryl's going to take us through the context for RCTs in Wake County.
All right, so before we get too far into the context, we want to talk about Wake County. Wake County is the largest district in the state of North Carolina, contrary to popular belief that Charlotte is the largest district. Wake is the largest district. We're sensitive about that. We've got 160,000 kids, 15th largest in the United States. We've got about 177 schools. We add about 3,000 kids every year. It's a really popular area. Half of the district is white, about a quarter black, 15% Hispanic, and roughly a third of the students receive free and reduced price lunch. It is in the heart of the Research Triangle, if folks are familiar with that. And so in Wake County, North Carolina State University is there, and nearby we have University of North Carolina and Duke University that make up the Research Triangle. So when we arrived to Wake County, the thing that we were confronted with often with folks was, how do we know that this program caused gains in student performance? And they say, are you sure this is the best intervention to use? Why aren't some results more conclusive? Should we extend this program to all schools? And so, we had these conversations with folks, and they would tell us that these were the frustrations that they had as agency leaders and department leaders. And so what we did is we looked at how they were making decisions. And so what we found is that there was an over-reliance on anecdotal evidence, to support program selection. People would say, I was familiar with this program, or my cousin recommended it to me, so I decided, I saw it on Google, whatever. Then we also saw that there was limited cost control, resulting in many simultaneous efforts. So we'd have several different literacy interventions, several different math interventions, all different kinds of interventions that would get in the way of each other. And so you're not necessarily knowing what is being effective because you've got so many things. And so that's the same thing with the insufficient knowledge of the number and scope of efforts. We also had a low barrier for program choice at the school and vendor levels and weak policies. So vendors could come into schools and talk about a product and how wonderful it was, and they would really sell people on it. And that was the way that people would be interested in choosing a program. But then when we came along and we started working together with folks, we helped them to understand what tough questions they need to ask, or we would ask the tough questions for them. So we figured out that with our team for Wake County, which consisted of our supervisor, our fellow supervisor, and some other people in the data and accountability and academics departments, that first you want to identify the need, diagnose the district need for a product or initiative. Then we needed to create and maintain a program inventory database to know what kinds of products are out there and what kinds of things are already in existence before we go buy another product. We need to know what we already have, and then identify whether gaps exist. The next step, we'd want to review the best existing evidence to match with need. And so think about, is there a product out there that has rigorous evidence to support that it's going to do what it says it's going to do? And then we'd measure that cost against the potential benefit. And then after that, we'd review proposed program and approve or reject it. One thing that's really important to consider here is materiality. Now, we're not talking about whether you want to think about buying a certain kind of pencil or a certain kind of pen. We're talking about literacy programs and things that are going to be much more high stakes, so things that may touch several schools. And then finally, we want to implement and design an effective monitoring and evaluation plan a pilot if necessary, and add new programs and initiatives to our inventory so that we can have a good record of what it is that we have. And so we wanted to move toward an enhanced data use and program selection, where we're utilizing rigorous theoretical and empirical research to support choices. We've revised our business case process for introducing new programs such that they have to go through this process and tell us why they want to spend money on something and how it's going to be evaluated. One thing that we're wanting to move toward is developing a real-time program inventory database, but with 177 schools, sometimes that's very difficult. So we haven't updated that in a while, but it's something that we're moving toward. But we do have a gateway for new proposed programs and stronger policy support than we had in the past. So I'll turn it to Matthew to talk about how this effort has gained some visibility.
Yeah, so with what you just saw, it hasn't gone unnoticed, and we were really excited about that because we've had people come to us and ask us, what is this enhancing data use thing that we're hearing about? And so I've had the opportunity to talk to various folks in various networks about how Darryl and I and our partners at SDP and our supervisors helped us kick off this effort. One of them was, I talked about it on a podcast, the Gov Innovator podcast, which I've never done a podcast before, so it was really neat to talk about this for the first time on a radio show. The Government Finance Officers Association asked us how we can work enhancing data use into their new cost benefit framework. So that was really exciting. Not done yet, but in progress. Word has it that through our conversations with various folks at the federal level, some of what we do might have worked its way into some non-regulatory guidance for ESSA. So if that's true, I can't say if it's true or not, but I heard that it might be. So that was really exciting. We did, with Results for America, we did a webinar, and we had an entire slide to ourselves talking about enhancing data use in Wake County. And finally, my boss just yesterday was at the White House talking about enhancing data use. So our superintendent was invited and asked him to go sit in for him. And so he had basically was sitting at a table with a bunch of policymakers talking about our little project called enhancing data use. So that was really exciting to hear. Yeah, Tom.
Man, I was going to ask, how about the other school districts in North Carolina? Is anybody saying, hey, we're using Achieve 3002, like, what are you guys learning? What's the impact? Or is it, and if not, like, what are ways to try to, increase that?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Achieve 3000 in a little bit of detail later on, but I haven't been approached about our Achieve results. Have you?
Yeah, so what we did learn is that when we had the spring convening, that some folks from Guilford County actually looked at our results. Guilford County is where Greensboro. Okay, so they actually looked at some of the results from our paper on Achieve 3000 to help inform their decision making. But I think what you find, Tom, is that in some of the smaller districts, a lot of the North Carolina districts are smaller. They are where we were several years ago in terms of relying on anecdotal evidence and things of that sort. So they might point to ours as one potential source of information, but they're going to get most of the information from vendors.
Yeah, and I'll ask questions as we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, so we're excited about this. We're excited that this little program that we have going is getting this attention, and hopefully it'll materialize into some big things and maybe serve as a reference point for other districts as well. And in that spirit of experimentation, we're seeing kind of a new landscape when it comes to large federal agencies and philanthropic groups sort of encouraging districts and organizations in social service organizations and school districts to do this kind of work. And the two examples I immediately thought of were the new low-cost, short-duration evaluation of education interventions, basically low-cost RCTs that are being funded by IES. And then the Laura and John Arnold Foundation also has a low-cost RCT grant. I think it's increased from $100,000 when we won one 2 years ago to $300,000 now. And so if you're planning a low-cost RCT, definitely investigate these two grant programs because they're very exciting. And then along with that, Mathematical Policy Research has an initiative called Rapid Cycle Evaluation, where they're basically doing something sort of similar to what Proving Ground is doing, trying to aggregate and pull together smaller sites that are doing all kinds of different ed tech experimentation and drawing causal conclusions from them, especially if they're RCTs. So there's a lot going on, and so as you start to do this work, look afield, and if you find anything that I might not know about, please let me know because this stuff's cropping up all the time.
All right, so now we're going to go into some select findings from some of the randomized trials that we've done in Wake County. So the first one we're going to talk about is the one that Tom referenced, the Achieve 3000. So the problem that the staff came to us about was that they wanted a solution to help students reach higher levels of reading proficiency in the area of Read to Achieve, which is our state legislation around reading. What happened is this product was being used in some schools that were lower performing. And then the person who was over elementary programs at the time decided that they wanted to think about expanding the program. And at the time, we worked for the deputy superintendent. And we said, well, the best way that you're wanting to expand that is through the randomized trial and the processes we've established with enhancing data use. And what he told us is that, well, someone told him that he didn't really have to do that. And so we said, oh, okay. So we went to our boss and said, well, you know, Kathy, they're saying that he doesn't really have to do that. So then the next day, he came to our office and said, okay, so how are we supposed to set up this randomized trial? So that's the way that we got this one started. And so what we did is first there was a pilot, and then what we did is we solicited schools. We have enough schools in Wake County, one thing, to have the power to understand effects. And so we have 105 elementary schools. So what we did is we solicited the principals and said, you know, are you interested in potentially having this reading program that could have an impact on your students? And so we had 32 schools volunteer, and then 16 schools served as the treatment schools, and then 16 served as a control group. And once they found out, some of the control schools found out they were controlled, they were like, oh no, I want to buy the product myself. And we were like, no, this is an experiment. So what you're going to do is business as usual, and then we'll see if this product is going to be worthwhile for us to purchase as a district. And so we've done this. We did a match pairs randomization where we looked at the end of year reading composites for the schools, matched each of them up that were close, and then one school in each match pair would get the achieve 3,000. And so what we saw is that implementation increased over a 3-year period. When we look at the 3-year pooled Lexile outcomes on 3 Lexile outcomes, which I'll explain in more detail in a moment, there were no effects. But we did see Lexile gains for the vendor's assessment of about 1/5 of a standard deviation in the 3rd year. So an interesting story is that this started in 2014. And so what we would have done based on those results is we would have said, well, we don't need to continue using the product because we didn't see effects. But then what we got pushback from the program staff, and they said, well, we got started kind of late, so we need to be able to do this for a little longer. So we expanded to the 2nd year. And so you see the number of activities that folks have done. 80 activities is the recommended threshold by the vendor that they claim that you would see any kind of impact. It wasn't really based on any causal relationship, but that's what they claimed, that you would see a stronger impact for kids who did 80 activities. So the 2nd year, we had a tech refresh in the schools where not all the schools had access to computers to be able to use the product. So they said, well, we probably need to think about doing it for a 3rd year. And so the 3rd year, we had someone who came in as an assistant superintendent for academics who was very familiar with Achieve 3000, and he worked with the area superintendents to come up with a stronger implementation plan, and we saw about 25%, roughly 25% of the students completing 80+ activities. So one thing that was really important about the way that we set this up is that we have evidence that we can point to the fact that people are trying to be accountable to actually meeting the goals that the vendor set out, because otherwise they would have, folks probably wouldn't have to be worried about that, and they just continue using the product in the way that they wanted to use it.
And what's sort of unusual about an educational tech product is you can say that, like how implementation went. Like, so for lots of kinds of educational interventions, like the, a PD kind of thing, it's hard to know whether people actually used the thing. It's even hard to know how many sessions an individual teacher showed up for, although that, presumably that's more easily knowable, even though lots of districts don't know it.
One thing I'll say is that the folks from Achieve 3000 have been really wonderful partners on this, in that they've provided us with usage data that we've been able to link to student ID. So we're fairly certain that we know when a student has met the 80 activity threshold, or however many activities it is that they use. When we look at the implementation by the school level, we see that there's a range. Some schools were very strong users, so we see this one school had about half of the students meet 80 activities. But then you see this one school here where only about 1% of the kids met 80 activities. And so with that, that's how we start describing to lay audiences the differences between intent to treat and treatment untreated, because we want them to understand that the intent to treat is important. If you're going to spend a whole lot of money on something, we want to see that there's an impact. But we also do want to understand that impact for the kids who used it. But we still want to look at it from both ways. Does that make sense?
Carol, I have a question for you. Did you get a good sense for why there was like a fairly high percentage of students who didn't get any treatment at all? Was that because of classrooms holding out, or was it like special ed kids?
With this, no, it wasn't special ed, because it's supposed to be across everybody who is on the Common Core, the standard course of study. Even if you have an IEP, would have access to it. What we found is that there was just loose compliance. There were some principals who didn't really enforce usage of it, and that was the case at this one school. But then we also saw that there were some schools that were really more enthusiastic about it. Even though these schools agreed to do this from the beginning, what you see is that there's going to be turnover. And one of the pieces of pushback that we got from Achieve in a lot of this is that, they'll say, Darryl, Matthew, this works in schools where the principal's really enthusiastic about it. I said, well, brother, we got 105 schools, right? And we're going to have principal turnover. That's the reality of the situation. So I need you to tell me that your product is causing a difference and not the product necessarily with all the enthusiasm that comes along with the principal. So.
So was there data during the school year that principals would have had to see, oh gosh, my students aren't using it, so our teachers aren't using it. So did they have data that they could have intervened with if they'd chosen to?
Yeah, they actually did. So there was a weekly report that was sent to the principals and the area superintendent, which oversees principals, about usage for Achieve 3000. And then over the time that we've been working with this process and working with them, they've developed an Achieve 3000 Leaders Edition, where they can actually look to see how many kids are actually using the product on, I think, a daily basis. So there were definitely some controls in place to ensure that folks were aware of where they were with usage. I think the reality on the school side, having worked in a school and school district, is that there's so many other things in addition to this particular product going on that it may not have gotten the same amount of attention that we would want it to have. But there were definitely some mechanisms for folks to be able to understand how much the product was being used.
And do you know, did the control schools get anything? So their principals showed interest in Achieve 3000. You guys said, well, just wait. Did they just say, all right, fine, I'm going to have my kids do something else that was free?
So what we did, so the way that it was structured is that we have a framework called the Daily 5 that we use in Wake County for literacy instruction. And this was supposed to be for the guided reading portion of the Daily 5. So the kids who were in the Achieve 3000 treatment group used Achieve 3000 as a part of that. The control group just used what they were using as just business as usual. So I wouldn't say that they necessarily got any real incentive for being a control school. That's just part of the way they had to be. As a part, that was the agreement before they signed on.
Darryl?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I know that part of the intervention is that usage data is readily available, but to what extent did you track data on whether teachers were actually looking at the data and at what level, item level data? It's it seems like the intervention is the reading program, but also there's the second intervention, which is the data itself.
Yeah, so one of the expectations that we had was that the students would complete 2 activities per week, I think it was. They would take a pretest and earn a certain score. And then the teachers would assign a challenge reading problem or something associated with the product. So the teachers were intimately involved with understanding what the expectations were when we lay these out at the beginning. Does that answer your question? All right.
And
yes,
Darryl, one quick question. Can you remind me, to do Achieve 3000, is there professional development that goes with getting ready?
Yeah.
With thinking of reading on AD?
Well, it's not, I don't know if it's as intense as that, but we did have not just offering the product to the schools. There was an Achieve 3000 leader that was assigned to every school that worked with them to understand what the goals should be and how they should be using the product. Then Achieve 3000 has a liaison that goes into the schools to help with any questions that they might have about the product, or help model lessons if they should be doing some model lessons or things around that sort, for helping them to use it.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Yes, sir.
Did you conduct the analyses using the statewide assessment rather than the vendor assessment?
We did that too, so we'll talk about that in a moment. I'll just move along. So we looked at the impacts. Oh, I'm sorry, Dan, did you have a question? No. Oh, okay. So we looked at the impacts several different ways. We looked at them from the intent to treat approach. We looked at them from the treatment on treated approach. We looked at them from the vendor's lexile, which was given to both the treatment and control schools. And we also looked at them, so for this one we saw for the treatment on treated impact for Achieve using the vendor's lexile, we didn't see any effects in 2014. This is a coefficient plot instead of the tables. We did see some minor positive effects in 2015 and then 2016. And then when we looked at them pooled across the 3 years, we saw about 0.1 standard deviation effect on the vendor's lexile.
So in the vendor's lexile, one thing I was wondering about here is, so the control schools got it, but what did it look like? Did it look like the Achieve 3000 experience? You know, so could this be measuring
Maturation.
Well, or just familiarity,
yeah,
with what the software interface looks like, and
Yeah.
what knowing how to log in. And
That was definitely one of the things that I brought up, Matthew. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that was one of the things that we wondered if being familiar with it might explain some of the differences that we saw. So in the first year, we also had poor implementation in the treatment and control groups taking the vendor assessment. And so we knew that with the North Carolina end of grade test, we'd get a crosswalk version of the lexile that we could use. And so we knew that just about everybody was going to have that. And so we looked at those data in addition to the DIBBLES, which is an early assessment. There's a crosswalk for lexiles with that. So we looked at it 3 different ways to triangulate the data and to try to account for some of the issues that you raised, Tom, with familiarity. We want to see if there's a consistent impact across those 3 different lexiles. Does that make sense? So when we looked at the impact on the North Carolina ERG lexile, we didn't see any statistical differences for the students who received Achieve 3000 and used it versus those who didn't.
Why is the error bar so much bigger in 2014?
I don't know. I'll have to check into that. I don't know why it's so big.
Scale is different too, so it looks.
Yeah.
But the scale, the x-axis scale is
It's also bigger relative
much bigger, so it looks bigger.
But
It's bigger
relative
to the other years.
to 15 and 16.
Right.
Oh, I just meant,
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
It's
Yes, sir.
treatment on the treated, and fewer kids got treated. So you've got some. The instrument's a little weaker, so you'll pick up some variation there.
Okay, that may explain it. Okay. Yep. All right.
But for every year?
No, just you mean for the first year? Maybe that's what it is.
And is that true?
Yeah, the first year we had fewer folks doing it. That's right. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to move to another project. This project is called Nurturing for a Bright Tomorrow. It's aimed at identifying more students who are from minority and underrepresented minority backgrounds for gifted education. And so what the people from Duke came to us with is that they said that they had a program that would increase representation. And we said, well, great. Can you show us some evidence that you have done this? And they came back with some things that weren't quite to the level of standard that we would want to see in terms of understanding impact. And so we consulted with our supervisor and we consulted with the program staff in Wake County and said, if you really want to understand this in a way that might produce some more rigorous evidence, we need to implement this in our randomized trial using our enhancing data use framework. And so what we've done with this is we again have 32 schools that we solicited, looking at the rates of gifted identification in those schools. We took the schools that were in the lowest half of the 105 schools, and we said of these 52 schools, there were 104 then. you were the ones that are not identifying students for gifted at the highest rate, or you have the lowest rates of identification. And so this product or this program should help you to improve that. Would you like to be a part of it? And so we had, again, 32 schools that said that they would be willing to do it. And again, we did a matched pairs randomization where 16 schools got the treatment and 16 served as a control group. One thing, so we were waiting until the fall of 2017 for us to have definitive results, because students are not identified as gifted until the 3rd grade. And so what we've done is we have some proximal measures that we're using to look at how well is the program working so far. And for that, we use something called the Naglieri Nonverbal Abilities Test, and we administered that to first graders. And we looked at that in 3 different ways. We first looked at the impact on the scale scores. We looked at the impact on the odds of being gifted, identified as gifted using the Naglieri thresholds, so a 0, 1, gifted or not. And then we looked at the counts of gifted students in between the treatment and control group. So when we look at the descriptive data, we see that 94 total students were identified, and you see that there's, it suggested there might be some promising evidence in the treatment group based on the raw count of numbers, that there are more kids being identified in the treatment group as compared to the control group.
Especially Hispanic and African American.
Especially Hispanic and African American. So then what we did is we looked at the Naglieri score using 5 different models. The first one was just looking at whether or not you were assigned to the treatment group. The second, we added some student characteristics. The third, we added school level characteristics. The fourth, we added prior achievement. And then the fifth, we include kindergarten initial assessment data. Now, the 4th and 5th models were obviously the better fitting models, but the challenge we saw, and the reason that we present so many different models, is that as you add the characteristics, you're losing kids along the way. So there's some kids for whom we don't have prior achievement, and there's some kids for whom we don't have kindergarten and initial assessment information. So we wanted to present it across several different ways. And so the only model that we saw with the scale score that had any statistically different impact was the one for which we added school characteristics. When we looked at the impact on the odds of being identified, we just did a simple logistic regression here, and we looked at 0, 1 being identified versus not identified, and we used those same models that I described before, and saw again that the only model that had any statistically different impact was the one that included school characteristics, student characteristics, and whether or not you were in the treatment or control group. Again, models 4 and 5 were the better fitting models, but we're losing kids along the way. And we explained to the program staff at all times why it is that we're presenting different models to them so they can understand we're trying to get a holistic understanding.
But this is a random assignment experiment, right? So why not just include dummy variables for the people who are missing, like baseline, achievement or baseline kindergarten?
You mean like an imputation, or
well, just include,
or just a dummy? Oh, it's a dummy.
Everybody, whether or not you have the prior scores, but just include dummy variables for people who don't. You're not worried about bias here because you have random assignment. You're just trying to explain some of the unexplained variation.
Well, that's something that we didn't consider, but it's certainly something that we're open to. And in any of this analysis, we're definitely willing to get any feedback to help improve what we're doing, as always. Okay, and so finally, we looked at the school counts, the counts of the number of kids. And for this, we used the negative binomial regression to look at whether the count of students was different. And so the first model we look at includes all 32 schools, and we see a statistically different impact. The second one, we removed some schools that we considered outliers that had a higher number of kids, but we still saw a statistically different impact after removing those outliers. The third model, we removed the schools that had a Cook's D greater than 1, and we didn't see a statistically different impact. And then in the fourth model, we looked at a winsorization of the data, where we took the lowest 5% and the highest 90 or the 95th percentile and above, and replaced them with the next scores, and we saw the statistical difference there. So we did feel confident that we saw a difference in the counts of kids who were being identified as gifted, and we were on our way. One of the challenges that I don't think we present here is that we didn't see an impact on the counts for the students from minority and for underrepresented minority backgrounds. So we do see some promise in this particular initiative, but we want to see more promise around the students who are from the underrepresented backgrounds. And so now I'll turn it over to Matthew to talk about our final RCT and process.
All right, so the third RCT that we'll talk about is called multi-tiered system of supports. Show of hands, has anyone heard of MTSS? Okay, cool. Well, so MTSS is this overarching framework that includes RTI, response to intervention, and PBIS, positive behavioral supports. And what we did in 2013-14 was we decided as a district that we were going to do MTSS district-wide. And so what that meant was a staggered rollout. And the first rollout, which is all too common in education agencies, is to say, who wants it? And so 7 area superintendents got to pick 4 schools. And so our first cohort of 28 schools who volunteered to receive the MTSS framework. And you know, they wanted to know what the results were after year 1. And year 1 came and went, and we were basically telling them, you know, it's going to be really hard because of the selection bias inherent in cohort 1. And so for cohort 2, I approached senior leadership and I said, can we do an RCT for cohort 2 because we're going to roll this out to 44 more schools? And they said no. And so what I did was I tried to get a grant to help support part of the implementation, and I did, from the Lauren John Arnold Foundation, to implement 2 fidelity of implementation measures through the National Implementation Research Network in Chapel Hill. And they got really excited about that, and they said, okay, so now we've got this grant and we've got these implementation measures, maybe we can do what you're asking. And so what does that require? Well, that requires identifying 88 schools and randomizing MTSS to 44 of them. And so we did that. And what we did it on was an index, a 50-50 index of behavior and academics, because the theory of action behind MTSS is that it will increase academics through the RTI tiered supports, and it'll decrease behavioral incidents through PBIS. And the treatment is essentially coaches, loads of PD for principals and for school staff, various resources to help deliver these tiered supports for both academics and behavior. So, you know, sort of like best practices, and it's something that we would consider a whole school reform model. And if you know anything about whole school reform models, you know, they inch along really slowly and often insignificantly. And so the Arnold Foundation said to us, you know, if we're going to help you out with this project, we want you to do a 2-year RCT. And so cohort 4, those 44 schools are going to come on in the following school year. So that's going to be 17-18. And so our analysis is going to be a 2-year analysis looking at the 44 schools from 15-16 and 16-17. And so what we find after year 1, if the year 1 results even mean anything, is that there was no impact on achievement across a wide range of elementary, middle, and high school measures. And then there were unexpected increases in elementary and middle school behavior. And we're trying to think through that, why that might be the case, right? The opposite happened. Did these MTSS schools feel some pressure to maybe, you know, get the bad apples out of the classroom so that MTSS could happen? Maybe. We're still trying to unpack, you know, why we were seeing this unexpected result, but it also could be that you know, implementation science suggests that it takes 2 to 4 years for something big to gain steam, and so maybe it's just we're early, and maybe this effect is just noise. And so across probably a dozen different achievement measures, this is what it looks like, where your coefficients are basically straddling the 0 line. And then for our short-term suspensions, our incidence rate ratio is 1.4 times in the treatment group than the control group. So an unexpected result, not an encouraging result, but you know, we'll wait and see. What's interesting about this work is the district is not going to be reporting academics and behavior, it's only going to be reporting implementation, but I need to report these results to the Arnold Foundation because they want to know about academics and behavior. And so someone's going to know about this, and hopefully we can learn something about it in the interim and make MTSS an even better intervention in year 2. We have 2 upcoming RCTs. One is for the Rosetta Stone English language software. And what we're going to do there, what we're doing there, it just kicked off, is we're taking newcomers to the system who are English language learners, and we're giving them access to Rosetta Stone software. As Tom mentioned, we also have usage data, so we know when students logged on, how long they used it for, how many activities they completed, so we'll be able to estimate those treatment untreated effects as well. And then we are right now I'm implementing a nudging your mentor teacher text messaging system where mentor teachers are going to get these text message reminders to do what they're supposed to do. And then beginning teachers are going to get text message reminders giving them information, providing supports based on a rubric that we provide to beginning teachers. And so in the end, what we want to know is, are mentor teachers doing what they're supposed to do on behalf of beginning teachers? Are beginning teachers satisfied with the supports that they're getting from mentor teachers? And finally, do beginning teachers in years 1, 2, and 3 stay with the system? So that's going to be, for a low-cost text messaging intervention, if we find evidence that even a single teacher decided to stay because they were getting these text message reminders, it seems like it would pay for itself. So this would certainly qualify under the low-cost RCT framework that we were talking about earlier. So we're always looking for opportunities, and I was just talking with someone from the Kennedy School before I got here who told me that one of the best ways to keep your RCT costs low is to just manipulate something that's already happening in the school system, right? And so with nudging mentor teachers and beginning teachers, they already get loads and loads of email. So even though it costs a little bit of money, why not replace some of those emails with texts, right? And so insights for you all is, if you're trying to do one of these, figure out what they're already doing, double the size of your sample, and then figure out a strategic way to randomize within that analytic sample. Strategy and opportunities?
So, yeah, this is both of us.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Which one's strategy?
I'm strategy.
Depends on the day.
So, we didn't want to just talk at you for the whole time. So we wanted to give you guys a few minutes to think about if your partner agencies, your current agencies that you're working in for some of you, or if you've worked in an agency, how are they currently measuring program effectiveness? And we want you to think about some prospective programs and policies for randomized trials, thinking about any stakeholders you need buy-in from, and as well as what are some potential challenges. So we wanted to take maybe 3 minutes for you to discuss amongst yourselves, and then we take a couple of examples to the whole group. So 3 minutes to discuss this to yourself. We're about to, after this, we'll wrap up.
I know, not after the
Oh, was it excited? Then it's mine, and I don't have any I'm not sick.
Something is like,
I didn't think it was too bad in a way.
Well, it's good points though. Why the arrow?
Well, he told us because there was a
No, because our arrow band is reduced for not more precise estimate.
This was, but we're talking about how many kids for the treatment or treated in the first year. I remember there were very few that
out of treatment. Yeah, okay. That's right. Yeah, so we lost a third of our kids. That's way different. 5 went out of 10 how many thousand? 4,000 kids? Yeah. Okay.
How many more we want to say? See how we're doing. What do we have? Oh, we have all of this. I can imagine.
I'm trying to get, I'm
That'll be a great every year there was a So another 30 seconds and we'll come back together. Okay, so if we could all come back together. All right, that was great. Everybody, the room was humming. That sounded so good. So, did anybody brainstorm any kind of challenges that they think they might face in pursuing this work? Yeah.
We just talked about the difficulty of, like, if you're a small organization, how do you get the scale necessary to get data that's really meaningful?
Tom is glad you asked. That's a great question. You know, the Mathematica issue that I mentioned earlier and Proving Ground aren't going to be available to everybody, but I think one possibility might be to suggest to districts in the same state that maybe they partner with neighboring districts in order to create that scale. So if you can do it in a geographically convenient way, that might be worth trying.
Yeah, we don't take lightly the fact that we're so big that we'll probably have the power to do some of these experiments in the way that you might not if you have maybe 2 or 3 schools. But we think partnerships can be very valuable.
In addition, you know, don't ignore the possibility of doing individual student random assignment or classroom level.
Yeah, and that's more difficult, and we understand that could be more politically difficult, but it's still a potential avenue as well. Yeah. All right. What, any other insights? Did anybody identify any prospective programs that they could look at?
I mean, this one's going to become relevant to many of you very soon. So were there any thoughts about how you would approach district stakeholders when asking about RCTs?
Going. So one thing we were talking about is like, so Michael asked a nice question about how you make appeals to authority around doing an RCT, and why that does like sings in the business sector, but it doesn't quite sing in the world of education agency work. And one thing I was saying is like, I thought you actually like slipped in a little note that all researchers should mind, which is like the bottom line is really important. So if you can make an argument for an RCT based on like effect per dollar, then you have more leverage with the people who make decisions about what to buy, how to design it and deliver it. And I think like when we work with fellows, we see like actually the financial argument is really important, except researchers are coming in like laterally to like accountability and research offices and asking to do experiments when those aren't necessarily the people who have like a stake in like the program purchasing. So like that kind of understanding the full like stakeholder map of an organization seems important because you want to know where the money's coming from.
Yeah, great point.
John?
Can you say a little bit, sort of following up on these points about, so a lot of folks here will be trying to do research with districts, but not actually be part of the district. And so you all had sort of were known, were trusted, had political allies, and sort of were able to get through a pretty impressive sort of program of RCTs in the district. Now, if you think about that and external researchers who have approached your districts, like what advice would you give to the graduate students here who are not named sort of Tom Kane or sort of something that can go in and kind of like maybe get people to do things? But how do they actually convene? How do you convince and sort of bring districts along from the outside?
Yeah, so we have a lessons learned group. We're going to tell you some more about that in a moment. But what I would say that is first, maybe we can just go to the lessons learned.
Yeah. Well, there's one lesson learned that I don't think is on there. That I was last term I was chair of our external research review committee, and we probably get about 100 applications per term from, and the term is a semester, half a year. We probably get about 100 a term, and they vary from really terrible to really excellent. And on the upper end of that, it's sometimes hard to make a decision about what kind of external research you want to allow into the district. And the deciding factor is usually, if you're collecting new data, we're probably going to say no. So try and design your experiment using existing data. If you don't link it in any way to the strategic plan, to our strategic priorities, we'll probably say no unless it's incredibly innovative and can be tangentially linked to it. And if you want a survey, and surveys count as new data, but surveys in particular are really hard to do because we already do so many surveys in the district.
Yeah, that's one of the battles we lost. Yeah, and one of the few losses we had.
Very painful. Yeah. Very painful. So,
yeah. So another thing is if you want to think about and listen to the agency, understand the agency, what are the things that the issues and the things that the agencies bring to the forefront? And then once you have an understanding of that, then you can move your conversation into where it might be important for us to, or for them to think about implementing a randomized trial to understand a particular product or initiative. We didn't just come in and say, we're going to implement randomized trials. We came in and we listened to people and understood what their frustrations were and talked to them about how they wanted more definitive results. And we said, look, hey, look, there's a way that you can do some of that in the work that we're familiar with. And people were pretty amenable to that over time.
Yeah, and related to that is, build relationships at conferences, right? At seminars like these, have good, sincere conversations with district folks and find out what their needs are, and then think creatively about how you can do this sort of work.
So another thing we found, it's important to be patient and persistent. We have not won every battle that we fought in Wake County around these issues. There's some programs that have been implemented that don't have the best evidence, but what we've done is we've opened the conversation to the point where it's not a foreign concept to do this work. And so, when we think about a lot of the major new initiatives, those kinds of things are usually going to come through one of us, or at least the Data and Accountability Office, for thinking about how we're going to measure and evaluate things. Another thing is that you want to plan for both implementation and evaluation. Now, for Achieve 3000, the Nurturing, and the MTSS, there are implementation meetings. So with the folks at Duke, we meet with them every month to talk about how implementation is going and what are the challenges we're seeing with implementation, so that they don't just see us as the people who are the data people that are going to come and analyze things. We want to see fidelity of implementation so that we can be providing very good evidence about whether the impact is there. Some of our partners, especially I would say the ones from the AIG department, and are very sensitive to anything that they do. They want to make sure that what they're doing is aligned to the work that we're and they're holding the stakeholders and vendors accountable for the goals that they set. They said, if this is what we were going to put into place, this is what we expect to see.
And get them to say that at the beginning, right? Because you don't want to have a situation where you have a moving target throughout the year and, we're asking for a fifth of a standard deviation and suddenly a tenth of a standard deviation is okay. Like, you don't want to be in that position. So be very firm about what your goals are.
Right. So one other thing that we're concerned about is sustainability. As Tom noted, I'm leaving the Wake County school system to go to another school system. And so if you guys can't tell, I have a very strong personality. And so there's some things that I'm able to really bird dog through or say, hey, look, we need to talk about this. But if I'm not there, it'll be hard for some of that to get done. And so, and then there's also the analytic methods piece. Not everybody in a school district, for example, is going to understand that differences between intent to treat and treatment untreated, and some of the other regression techniques that I learned from the lovely Harvard Graduate School of Education, and Matthew learned from you. Okay. So, what we want to do is make sure that we're building capacity with our district, and that's sometimes difficult because it was several years of coursework that helped me get to where I am. And so we want to think about that and plan for sustainability. That's one area that we want to look at. And then lastly, we have done a number of quasi-experiments as viable alternatives to randomized trials. We've looked at some work where we've done regression discontinuities. We've done some matching techniques, which aren't my favorite, but I think are pretty substantial evidence for understanding impact. So not everything we're going to be able to do is going to be a randomized trial. So we want to make sure that despite that being the gold standard, there's some other compromises that we make. Any other words on that? No. So, and the last story that I'll tell is I applied for this fellowship and interviewed for it twice. And the first time I interviewed for it, the feedback that I got is they give you this scenario and tell you, you need to determine impact. And I said, well, before they implemented this program, they came to me and I told them that they had to do it as a randomized trial. And the feedback that I got was, we had trouble with you assuming randomization because that doesn't really happen. Well, I can say that for sure it has happened to Wake County, that we're able to do that. And as long as you're able to help people understand why it is that you need to do that and what the benefits are, it's something that can be done. And so I really want to thank the people from the Strategic Data Project, from Wake County, my partner, the best work partner I've ever had, and my professors here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education who've given me some of the tools that I've been able to help people in Wake County along. So thank you all for your time today.
So, thank you so much. We're ready for the reception. If you